This is not a ghost story. This really happened. It was a quiet street in a quiet Canadian town, Medicine Hat, Alberta, a place where prairie meets sky, where everyone knows their neighbors, where nothing truly terrible is supposed to happen. April 23, 2006, a Sunday afternoon, spring sunlight filtering through still bare trees. A young boy walks down the street heading to his friend's house for a play date. Tyler Jacob Richardson, 8 years old. They were supposed to hang out, play video games, do whatever 8-year-old boys do on Sunday afternoons. But when the boy arrives at the Richardson home, something feels wrong. The blinds are all closed. No one answers the door. The family car sits in the driveway, but the house looks empty, dark, silent in a way that presses against your chest. The boy peers through a window, and what he sees sends him running to his mother. When police arrive minutes later, they already know this won't be a welfare check. This will be something else entirely. Inspector Brent Secundiak approaches the house, looks through a basement window, sees what the child saw, a body on the floor, motionless in a way that leaves no room for hope. Officers enter through the front door. The silence breaks. Inside, they find chaos, violence, blood spatter patterns that tell a story no one wants to read. In the basement, Mark Richardson, 42 years old, and his wife, Deborah, 48. Both stabbed multiple times, both dead. Upstairs, in a small bedroom decorated with posters and toys, Tyler Jacob Richardson, 8 years old, killed in his own bed, his throat slashed. And the 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine? She's gone. At first, it looks like every parent's nightmare. A family slaughtered, a child missing, some unknown monster loose in a quiet Canadian town. But very quickly, within hours, investigators realize something far more disturbing. They're not searching for a kidnapped little girl. They're hunting a 12-year-old murder suspect, and the 23-year-old man she calls her boyfriend, a man who tells people he's a vampire. To understand what happened in that house, you need to understand who the Richardsons were before everything shattered. Mark and Deborah Richardson weren't perfect. They had a past. Both had struggled with drug addiction years earlier, had met at a gym in Sudbury, Ontario, while trying to rebuild their lives. They'd gotten clean together, gotten married, started fresh. They moved to Medicine Hat for exactly that reason, a fresh start, a quiet place to raise their children, a chance to leave the mistakes of the past behind and build something stable, something normal. By all accounts, they'd succeeded. Mark worked steady. Deborah stayed home with the kids. They lived in a modest house in a safe neighborhood, went to parent-teacher conferences, took family vacations, did all the things families do. They had 2 children, Tyler Jacob, born in 1998, and Jasmine, born in 1993. Jasmine had been, by all early accounts, a bright kid, sociable, well-liked at school, the kind of daughter who brought home decent grades and had sleepovers with friends and seemed to be navigating childhood just fine. But something started shifting around 2005, subtle at first. The normal teenage rebellion stuff, different clothes, different music, wanting more privacy, pushing back against rules. Except it went further than normal. Jasmine discovered gothic culture, dark makeup, black clothes, MySpace profiles and social media accounts where she could reinvent herself, present a version that felt more real than the 12-year-old kid her parents still saw. She created multiple profiles across different platforms, MySpace, Zorpia, others, and lied about her age on all of them, said she was 15, 16, older, posted photos that made her look more mature, wrote things that suggested interests far beyond what a 12-year-old should be exploring. Serial killers, scarification, kinky shit, as she put it in one profile. She listed Jeffrey Dahmer among her heroes, posted about being bisexual, Wiccan, drinking alcohol. Whether any of it was true or just the persona she was building online didn't really matter. She was crafting an identity, and that identity was dark, edgy, older. Her parents noticed. How could they not? The dress code violations at school, the argumentative attitude at home, the hours spent online, door closed, creating a digital life they couldn't access or control. They worried. They set boundaries. They did what concerned parents do. They tried to protect their daughter from influences they didn't understand and couldn't quite see. But in trying to protect her, they pushed her toward the exact thing they feared most. Jeremy Allen Steinke was born January 15, 1983, in Medicine Hat. 23 years old by the time this story reaches its terrible conclusion. His childhood had been brutal in ways that don't excuse what he'd eventually do, but help explain how he became the person who'd do it. His mother, Jacqueline Ann May, struggled with alcoholism. They moved constantly. New towns, new stepfathers, new boyfriends, new chaos. Jeremy never stayed anywhere long enough to make real friends, never felt stable enough to build a normal childhood. And the abuse was constant. Physical, severe, the kind that leaves scars you can't see. One stepfather locked him in a deep freezer. Another beat him regularly until Jeremy, desperate and terrified, broke the man's arm with a lead pipe in self-defense. He was bullied mercilessly at school. Kids called him Stinky because of his last name. He had no friends, no safe spaces, no adults who could protect him from the violence at home or the cruelty at school. By the time he reached adulthood, Jeremy Steinke had become exactly what you'd expect from that kind of childhood. Damaged, isolated, struggling to find an identity that made him feel powerful instead of powerless. He found that identity in Gothic subculture, specifically in the idea that he was a vampire, not metaphorically. He genuinely seemed to believe he had supernatural abilities. He wore contact lenses that made his eyes look inhuman, dressed in black, told people he was 300 years old, that he could sense things normal people couldn't, that he existed outside the rules that governed ordinary human life. To most adults, Jeremy Steinke looked like exactly what he was, a troubled 23-year-old playing dress-up, using fantasy to cope with trauma he'd never properly processed. But to a 12-year-old girl looking for something bigger than her suburban life, looking for someone who understood darkness and difference and rebellion, he looked fascinating. They met in January 2006 at the Medicine Hat Mall. A friend of Jasmine's introduced them, two people from the local Gothic scene bonding over shared interests. Jasmine was 12, Jeremy was 23. He knew. Let's be absolutely clear about that. Jeremy Steinke knew Jasmine Richardson was 12 years old. There was no deception on her part about her real age when they met in person. No misunderstanding about the enormous gap between them. And he pursued her anyway. Their relationship developed quickly, fueled by the intensity that comes from forbidden things. Messages on MySpace, long conversations about darkness, about being misunderstood, about how nobody else could comprehend what they had together. Jasmine felt seen. For maybe the first time in her 12-year-old life, she felt like someone truly understood her. Not the kid her parents saw, not the student her teachers saw, but the person she felt like inside. Jeremy fed that feeling, told her she was mature for her age, different, special, that what they had was real love, the kind that transcended age and rules and society's narrow definitions, classic grooming language. But Jasmine, at 12, had no framework to recognize it as manipulation. Her parents, however, recognized the danger immediately. When they discovered their 12-year-old daughter was in a relationship with a 23-year-old man who dressed like a vampire and talked about supernatural powers, they did exactly what any rational parent would do. They forbade the relationship. Absolutely, completely, no contact. They restricted Jasmine's internet access, monitored her social media, made it clear that Jeremy Steinke was not allowed near their daughter, ever. And in doing so, they transformed themselves, in Jasmine's 12-year-old mind, from protectors into enemies, into obstacles between her and true love. The restrictions only intensified the relationship, made it feel more real, more important, more like the epic romance Jasmine had convinced herself she was living. She and Jeremy continued communicating secretly, found ways around the parental controls, sent messages through friends' accounts, met when they could get away with it. And the nature of their conversations changed, darkened. At first, it was typical teenage rebellion talk. I hate my parents. They don't understand us. I wish they'd just leave us alone. But Jeremy, with his own history of trauma and violence, with his fantasy of being a powerful supernatural being, with his willingness to validate a 12-year-old's darkest thoughts, he didn't shut those conversations down. He encouraged them. The messages escalated from, "I wish they'd leave us alone," to, "It would be better if they weren't here," to, eventually, explicit fantasies about killing them. Jasmine reportedly told friends at school about plans to murder her family. They didn't believe her, thought she was being dramatic, saying shocking things for attention, the way insecure 12-year-olds sometimes do. But she wasn't joking. In the weeks before the murders, investigators would later discover, Jasmine drew stick figures in her school locker, crude drawings depicting her family being killed, her parents lying down, her little brother, herself standing over them. She sent Jeremy messages on MySpace that made her intentions clear. "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you." Jeremy responded with his own violent fantasies, wrote about wanting to slit her parents' throats, about making them pay for keeping him and Jasmine apart, about their blood being payment for the disrespect they'd shown. They watched the film Natural Born Killers together, Oliver Stone's 1994 movie about a serial killer couple who murder the woman's parents before going on a multi-state rampage. It wasn't entertainment for them, it was a blueprint. And at some point, neither of them could say exactly when, the line between fantasy and plan disappeared entirely. April 22, 2006. Late evening, the Richardson family settled into their normal Saturday night routine. Mark and Deborah downstairs, Tyler Jacob already in bed, Jasmine in her room, supposedly asleep. Her parents had no idea she was awake, waiting, knowing what was about to happen. Jeremy Steinke approached the house. He was wearing a neoprene mask, the kind used for cold weather sports, now repurposed to hide his identity. He carried a knife. How he got inside isn't entirely clear, but once he was in, there was no hesitation. He encountered Deborah first, in the basement. She never had a chance to scream, never had a chance to fight back effectively. Jeremy stabbed her 12 times. 12 deliberate wounds. Not the frenzied attack of someone out of control, but the methodical violence of someone following through on a plan. Mark heard something, came downstairs, saw his wife bleeding out on the floor and this masked figure standing over her. He fought, tried to stop what was happening. But Jeremy was younger, stronger, armed, and determined. As Jeremy stabbed him to death, Mark Richardson asked the question any parent would ask. "Why are you doing this?" Jeremy's response, according to later testimony, "It's what your daughter wanted." Those were some of the last words Mark Richardson heard before he died in the basement of his own home. Upstairs, Tyler Jacob woke up, maybe heard noises, maybe sensed something was wrong the way children sometimes do. Jeremy went to his room. 8-year-old Tyler Jacob Richardson, a little boy who'd done nothing wrong, whose only crime was being born into this family, had his throat cut. Throughout all of this, where was Jasmine? According to different accounts, her exact role varied. She claimed at trial that she stayed in her room, that she never thought Jeremy would actually go through with it, that she was horrified when it happened. Other evidence suggested more active participation, that she helped, that she encouraged Jeremy, that she was there when her little brother died. What's certain is this: when it was over, when 3 members of her family lay dead in the house where she'd grown up, Jasmine Richardson walked out with Jeremy Steinke. They'd done it, removed the obstacles, proven their love. Now they could be together. For a few hours after the murders, Jasmine and Jeremy acted almost normal, like teenagers on a date, not killers fleeing a triple homicide. They went to a friend's house, hung out, talked about future plans, where they'd go, what they'd do now that they were free. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. A 12-year-old girl, hours after her family's murder, acting like this was all just part of some grand romantic adventure. But by Sunday afternoon, the bodies had been discovered. The young boy peering through the window, the horrified mother calling police. The realization that this wasn't an accident or a burglary gone wrong. An Amber Alert went out for Jasmine Richardson. The assumption initially was that she'd been kidnapped, that whoever murdered her family had taken her. But investigators found that stick figure drawing in her school locker, found the MySpace messages, started piecing together a very different story. The search for a kidnapped victim became a manhunt for suspects. Police tracked them to Leader, Saskatchewan, a small town about 130 kilometers away. Less than 24 hours after the murders, both were in custody. Jeremy Steinke was arrested without incident. So was Jasmine. And their reactions to being caught? According to officers present, they seemed almost confused about why this was such a big deal. Like children who'd broken a window and couldn't understand why everyone was so upset. Jasmine, in particular, showed what Inspector Secundiak later described as a disturbing lack of comprehension about what she'd done. Not remorse, not guilt, just confusion that this wasn't playing out like whatever fantasy she'd imagined. Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke were both charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The legal situation was complicated by Jasmine's age. She was 12 at the time of the murders, barely old enough to understand the permanence of death, let alone the full weight of what she'd participated in. Canadian law has specific provisions for young offenders. The Youth Criminal Justice Act limits how children can be sentenced, recognizing that 12-year-olds aren't fully formed adults, that their brains are still developing, that rehabilitation might be possible even after horrific crimes. But this wasn't shoplifting. This was the calculated murder of 3 people, including a child. At her trial, Jasmine's defense argued she'd been manipulated by an adult, that Jeremy Steinke had groomed her, preyed on her vulnerability, directed her toward violence she never would have considered on her own. There's truth in that argument. A 23-year-old man absolutely manipulated a 12-year-old girl. The power dynamic, the age gap, the way he validated her darkest thoughts, that's textbook grooming. But the prosecution presented evidence that complicated that narrative. The messages Jasmine had sent, the drawings, the fact that she'd told multiple friends about planning to kill her family, her apparent lack of remorse. Was she a victim? Yes. Of grooming, of manipulation, of an adult who should have known better taking advantage of a vulnerable child. Was she also responsible for what happened? The courts decided yes. In 2007, Jasmine Richardson was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder. At 13 years old, she'd had a birthday between the murders and the conviction. She became the youngest person in Canadian history ever convicted of multiple first-degree murders. Her sentence? 10 years. The maximum possible under Canadian youth criminal justice law. 4 years in a psychiatric institution, followed by conditional supervision in the community. Jeremy Steinke's trial came later, in November 2008. His defense was weaker. He was an adult, he'd carried out the physical acts of murder, he'd known exactly what he was doing. The jury found him guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 3 concurrent life sentences with no possibility of parole for 25 years. While in prison, Jeremy legally changed his name to Jackson May, honoring his mother Jacqueline, who died in 2016 while he was still incarcerated. The media coverage of the Richardson murders was intense, and in many ways, sensationalistic. Headlines screamed about the vampire boyfriend and the goth killer. News segments dissected Jasmine's MySpace profile, showing her dark photos, quoting her posts about serial killers and violence. The gothic subculture got blamed. Social media got blamed. Violent movies got blamed. The internet itself got blamed. As if technology, rather than a complex combination of grooming, mental health issues, family dysfunction, and individual choices, was the root cause. There's something deeply uncomfortable about how the case was covered. A real family was dead. Mark, Deborah, and 8-year-old Tyler Jacob Richardson, who'd done nothing wrong and didn't deserve what happened to them. But the media narrative focused more on the spectacle, the shocking nature of a 12-year-old killer, the vampire angle, the online relationship. The Richardsons became a cautionary tale, their deaths used to warn parents about the dangers of the internet, of gothic culture, of not monitoring their children closely enough. As if more monitoring could have prevented this. As if the problem was insufficient parental control, rather than a 23-year-old predator grooming a vulnerable child. Medicine Hat, a city of about 60,000 people, was traumatized. This kind of violence doesn't happen in small Canadian cities. Families aren't slaughtered in quiet suburban neighborhoods. 12-year-old girls don't murder their families. Except one did. And the community had to find a way to live with that knowledge. On May 6th, 2016, exactly 10 years after her conviction, Jasmine Richardson completed her sentence. She walked free at age 23, the same age Jeremy Steinke had been when he helped her murder her family. Her identity is legally protected. Canadian law prohibits publishing the names of young offenders, so officially, she's known only as JR. Where she is now, what she does, whether she's built a life for herself, all of that remains private, protected. Her lawyers called her the poster child for rehabilitation. During her conditional supervision period, she took classes at Mount Royal University in Calgary, stayed out of trouble, showed, according to those monitoring her, genuine growth and understanding of what she'd done. Some people find this encouraging, evidence that the youth justice system works, that even children who commit horrific crimes can be rehabilitated if given proper support and treatment. Others find it infuriating. 3 people are dead. A little boy's life was cut short before it really began. And the person who helped orchestrate those murders gets to walk free, build a life, potentially have a future. There's no easy answer. No satisfying resolution to the question of justice versus rehabilitation, punishment versus redemption. Jeremy Steinke remains in prison, won't be eligible for parole until 2033, when he'll be 50 years old. By all accounts, he's expressed remorse, though how genuine that remorse is, whether it's real understanding or just words said to parole boards, nobody can know for certain. But Jasmine is free, living somewhere under a different name. Maybe she's built something meaningful from the wreckage. Maybe she carries the weight of what happened every day. Or maybe she's just living, working, existing in the world as if that night in April 2006 was someone else's story. The Richardson family murders raise questions we still haven't answered, maybe can't answer. At what age is someone capable of true evil? Can a 12-year-old really understand what murder means? The permanence, the devastation, the way it destroys not just the victim, but everyone connected to them. Where's the line between being a victim and being a perpetrator? Jasmine was absolutely groomed by an adult, but she also made choices, drew those pictures, sent those messages, walked out of that house. Is redemption possible after something like this? Can someone who participated in murdering their own family, including an 8-year-old child, ever truly be rehabilitated? The answers depend on who you ask. Criminal justice experts might say yes, that Jasmine's age at the time, combined with intensive therapy and supervised reintegration, suggests rehabilitation is possible. Tyler Jacob Richardson's friends and extended family might have a different answer. And there's another question, darker and more disturbing. How many relationships like Jasmine and Jeremy's exist right now? How many vulnerable teenagers are being groomed by adults who validate their worst impulses? The internet didn't create this dynamic. Predatory adults have always existed. Vulnerable children have always existed. Dark fantasies and teenage rebellion have always existed. But the internet makes it easier. Makes it possible for a 23-year-old man and a 12-year-old girl to meet, to develop a secret relationship, to encourage each other's worst thoughts without any adult intervention until it's too late. MySpace is dead now, but Instagram, TikTok, Discord, Snapchat, they all serve the same function. Spaces where young people create identities, where they're exposed to influences their parents can't monitor, where predators can find vulnerable targets. And most of the time, it's harmless. Most online relationships don't end in violence. Most dark teenage phases are just phases. But sometimes, they're not. On April 23, 2006, in a quiet house on a quiet street in Medicine Hat, Alberta, 3 people were murdered. Mark Richardson, who'd overcome addiction to build a stable life for his family. Deborah Richardson, who'd done the same. And Tyler Jacob Richardson, 8 years old, who'd done nothing except be born into the wrong family at the wrong time. They were killed because a 12-year-old girl convinced herself that a 23-year-old man dressed as a vampire was her true love, that her parents were obstacles, that murder was a romantic gesture. And the most disturbing part isn't the gothic aesthetic, isn't the internet, isn't even the age gap. It's how easily fantasy became reality, how quickly "I hate my parents" turned into "let's kill my parents," turned into 3 bodies in a basement. The scariest thing about the Richardson murders isn't that they happened, it's that they could happen again. Somewhere right now, a vulnerable teenager is being groomed by someone older. Somewhere, dark fantasies are being validated instead of challenged. Somewhere, a child is convincing themselves that violence is the solution to their problems. Most of the time, it stays fantasy. Most of the time, someone intervenes. Most of the time, kids grow up and realize how messed up their thinking was. But sometimes, they don't. Sometimes fantasy and reality blur until there's no distinction. Sometimes a 12-year-old girl genuinely believes that love means murder. And sometimes, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, someone discovers that belief has consequences written in blood. Thank you for watching this video. Sleep well. And remember, not every dark phase is just a phase.